Exactly 1 week after terrorists murdered 17 people in Paris, the magazine Charlie Hebdo has resoundingly stood its ground, actually printing 5 million copies of its new issue and declaring all is forgiven. A cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad shedding a tear declares "Je suis Charlie." And as I said, it is already sold out in France. As copies hit the newsstands, Al-Qaeda in Yemen tried to steal the limelight in this deadly media war by posting a video claiming responsibility for the attack on the satirical magazine. But this week, the rector of the Great Mosque in Paris called for an urgent reform of Islam to rip politics out of the religion and to try to disempower the violent extremists.
Today, we want to appeal for a change in religious thinking in Islam, that we abandon political Islam, that we should not turn it into a policy, but to keep it as a religion. We want to reform the training of imams. We don't want to allow these imams just to be trained anywhere or in Arabia spouting fundamentalism.
Even outside extremist circles, there is a fierce debate among Muslims about just how much offense they can take. One thing is for sure, depictions of the Prophet Muhammad are not banned by the Quran. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Majid Messaoudine, a city council member for Paris Saint-Denis suburb, which does have a significant Muslim population, and here in the studio, Sara Khan, co-director of Inspire, which is a British organization that fights extremism and gender discrimination. Welcome to both of you. Let me first start with you, Majid, there in France. What else could Charlie Hebdo have done today other than put this cartoon on the cover? 4 million people turned out across France, millions more supporting the right to free speech around the world.
Well, good evening. I think Charlie Hebdo could have put something else on the first cover. For example, to condemn terrorism and to say that Islam has nothing to do with what happened 1 week ago. I think they knew that drawing the Prophet would offend, would insult millions, thousands of Muslims all over the world. And in France, many people are shocked because they think that there's a line. And drawing the Prophet, Charlie Hebdo crossed once again this line. I'm not sure it was the good moment for that.
Okay, I asked you, wasn't it the only moment to do this now? And I asked you, you say they should have said, this is not Islam. Surely the "Je suis Charlie" and "Tout est pardonné," all is forgiven, means precisely that.
No, it means that Islam has something to be forgiven for. And the Prophet can't wear a "Je suis Charlie" banner because the Muslims can't agree with all that Charlie Hebdo says or draws. So I think that the main mistake is to draw the Prophet and to make him wear this banner of "Je suis Charlie."
All right.
I think this is a mix. And putting the Prophet is making a link between terrorism and Islam.
Let me turn to Sara Khan here in the studio. Do you agree? Did you think that this was provocative of Charlie Hebdo? And did you get that message that Majid seems to have gotten from this cover?
No, I don't, actually. I mean, I didn't find the image to be provocative, or there was an attempt by Charlie Hebdo to be provocative either. And I think we have to be very careful, because when we say Muslims are offended, you know, we're talking about 1.6 billion Muslims across the globe. They're going to hold very diverse views. You will have views like Majid who will argue that it is offensive, but you'll have other views of Muslims who will say it isn't. For myself personally, when I saw the image, there were 3 messages I felt Charlie Hebdo were conveying. The first was that we're expressing solidarity with our murdered colleagues. The second actually was that they were actually trying to express a respectful representation of the Prophet, not in a physical sense, but respectful to his teachings. Many Muslims will tell you that the Prophet was a man who was regularly denigrated, mocked, humiliated, abused during his lifetime, and he responded with mercy, with compassion, and above all, forgiveness. So the "all is forgiven" strapline on the top of the image isn't, for me, very powerful. And I think the third message of the cartoon actually is showing that it's in defiance of the terrorists. It's saying that rather than denigrating ordinary Muslims across the world, we're actually undermining the message of the terrorists by saying it is you who insult the message and the teachings of the prophets themselves.
Let us get to the heart of the matter of the depiction. Yes, there have been much more offensive, vulgar depictions, but in terms of an edict against depicting the prophet, it does not say that in the Quran. Where does this all come from? And let's not forget that for years, for centuries, we've had brilliant art, works of art with the prophet, and nobody has objected to it.
You're absolutely right, Christiane. I mean, the dominant view is actually very much a modern one, and it seems to clash with, firstly, the Quran, and there is nothing explicitly that prohibits the image, the drawings, or any kind of imagery of the Prophet. But also it flies in the face of Muslim history itself. So as you rightly pointed out, Muslim history is replete with, not with cartoons, sorry, with images, with drawings of beautiful medieval paintings of the Prophet Muhammad standing alongside Jesus, for example. Those images were there, drawn by Muslims, featured in Persian and Turkish, in artworks and so forth. So it's there as a form of reverence and respect to the Prophet. I think what we're seeing actually today, it's the fact that in the last century in particular, there has been a rise in extreme and hardline interpretations of Islam, Salafism, for example, which has dominated the landscape of Islam today in the modern context. And it's this that is a serious challenge that are facing Muslims today.
Majid Messaouddin, let me ask you to answer that. You were actually friends with Stéphane Charbonnier, Charb, the main cartoonist who was slaughtered on last Wednesday. You were friends with another of the Charlie Hebdo columnists there. Do you agree with what Sarah has just said and what many Muslims are saying, that actually there is no real ban in the Quran, and those who say that depicting the Prophet is offensive are actually those who are using a hardline Salafist interpretation of that?
Well, I knew two of them, yeah, Stéphane Charbonnier and Bernard Maris. What I can tell you is that, for example, my sister is wearing the veil. She has not a Salafist interpretation of Islam, but she has been shocked by this drawing of the Prophet. We can't understand why many Muslim people in France were shocked by this cover without taking into account the context we are living in France. We have a widespreading Islamophobia in this country. We had like almost 100 racist acts against Muslims these latest days. So we can't make as if there was not a context that explains why Muslims feel once again insulted. This time it's by Charlie Hebdo, 364 other days by year, it's by the government, it's by the political parties. So I think we have to be careful with these symbolics. And even if there's no strict prohibition to do it, we have to take into account the feeling of the Muslims, because they are part of the population and we have to respect them.
Can I ask you to just confirm? I mean, you said, yes, Charlie Hebdo has the right to exist and we have the right to criticize it. But what is your reaction to the rector, to Dr. Dalil Boubaker, who said in no uncertain terms to me, we must have a reform of Islam, we must rip politics out of the religion, and we must not allow the extremists, the Arabian Wahhabi Salafists, to have the agenda, and our imams need to understand that Islam is not all that. Do you agree with that?
Well, what Dalil Boubaker says is not a scoop. He does not represent all the Muslims in France. The Muslim community is not organized, as you know. The problem is that you have a small minority which is getting more and more extremist, but they are not representative of the majority of the Muslims in France. We have to let the Muslims getting organized. We have to let them choose the way they want to live their life. The problem is not a problem of organization. The problem is not the problem of getting politics into Islam. The problem is that in France, the elites, the French Republic, does not consider Islam as a normal religion. They still consider it as a threat. They still see Muslims not as citizens, but as interior enemies. This is the main issue in France. So Dalil Boubaker is talking just for himself, his friends, but he's not talking about other Muslims in France.
All right, but he is the rector of the Grand Mosque in Paris, and he is the head of the Council of the French Muslim Faith. So let me ask you, Sarah, where do we go from here? Because what Majid is describing is sort of grievance offense. This is a big global grievance that Muslims have, and these cartoons exacerbate the feeling of being under siege. Where do we go from here in terms of freedom of expression balanced with faith?
I think there's two things. I mean, I think Majid raises a valid point about how French Muslims, many, especially the young, feel disenfranchised. They're experiencing discrimination. We know, for example, that there's very high unemployment rates amongst French Muslims. That needs to be addressed. This feeling of social frustration amongst Muslim youth in France needs to be addressed, because that's why extremists deliberately target these young people, because they know they feel aggrieved. So that has to be addressed and that has to be tackled. But yes, of course, I mean, I agree very much that we do need to rip out politics from Islam, because I think that's been one of the most poisonous things to have happened to Islam, where it has become so politicized, and it's very damaging in that sense. So there has to be that debate. There has to be taking that debate forward. And I think we also have to recognize that, yes, there is freedom of expression, and there are many, many Muslims, and we've seen this in the Arab Spring. They died, they yearned for freedom of expression, because they knew it's freedom of expression that protects all their other rights. If they can't stand up to authorities, what other rights is there for them to protect? So it's very, very important. Naturally, many activists like myself, we feel very passionate about embodying freedom of expression, because in the work that I do here in London, challenging gender discrimination with Muslim communities, challenging extremist ideologies, we do that through freedom of expression, and many people try to silence our voices in this debate. So challenging and protecting freedom of expression is fundamental as well.
On that note, Sara Khan, thank you very much indeed for joining me from London, and Majid Moussaoudine, thank you so much for joining me from Paris. It is a debate that will continue.